a child, before life removed all the innocence, my father would lift me high and dance with my mama and me.
Hey everyone, welcome to my weekly messages. I'm Jelaila Starr. Today the topic is fathers, because it's Father's Day. And I want to talk to you a little bit about Father's Day from a different perspective. You know, we all have this stereotype that, well, people in my generation grew up with, this perfect dad as viewed on TV by, you know, Mr. Cleaver and Jim Anderson. Jim Anderson was a dad on Father Knows Best. I think he was a doctor in that one. Anyway, we had these ideals of what this perfect father was, who never got angry, who was always there for us, always had the best advice, and was, you know, a perfect gentleman and a great husband, and listened to his kids. Well, if you're like me, your dad didn't quite meet that standard. And as a result, you know, we all have our wounds from our childhood. But, you know, we're way down the road in this ascension process, and we know that whatever we're carrying right now is causing us a lot more pain than it would 15 years ago, simply because the vibrational frequency of the planet has risen. So anything that that's still stuck down there and unresolved is coming up in some pretty intense ways. So I thought I'd take this opportunity on Father's Day to focus on some of the things that might be holding us back, that maybe we can release if we can see it from a different perspective. So I'll use my own situation and my experience with my dad as an example. Okay, so my dad, he was handsome, he was charismatic, he was a great dancer, he had impeccable manners, he had grace, he was neat, he was organized, extremely intelligent, very strong-willed. And that's the good things about my dad. I remember him teaching me to dance for a church social that was coming up, and there was a boy that was there. And my dad was trying to teach me the waltz. It was the box step for the waltz, I guess. And I have some really good memories of my dad. And I cherish all those memories. But then I have these other memories from my dad. I have these memories of anxiety, walking on eggshells, always feeling like I couldn't breathe. I'm always waiting to exhale, because my dad had a volatile temper, and it would go off. You never knew what was going to set him off. And when he went off, he went off. I'm telling you, he was punching holes, screaming. He never hit any of us. But he'd go downstairs, and he had this impeccably designed work area, because my dad had a place for everything, drawers for everything. He was extremely organized. I think that was all those years in, you know, working on the ships in the Great Lakes. He had this much room to live in, so everything had to be neat and organized and everything. But then he also had my English grandmother. She was well educated, and she instilled in all her kids impeccable manners, etiquette, all that good stuff that the English are known for. So my dad had all that as well. But I just remember being terrorized by my dad's anger. And when he'd have a temper tantrum, it was like an explosion in our house. And then it would be followed by this deathly silence. And then my dad would kind of isolate himself away for sometimes days. And I just remember, because you're a kid, you think it's all about you, right? You think you did something wrong. So I think I did something to cause the anger, and then I did something to cause him to not want to be around me. Well, how could a father who was all these good things be that as well? I just thought, you know, well, my mom would say he's mean. And I'm like, wow, my dad's mean. Anyway. So now I see things differently, not only as an adult who understands mental illness, but also from a higher perspective. So that's what we need to understand to heal these types of situations. So from the perspective of mental illness, I see that my father had crippling anxiety, and he had panic attacks. And what I was experiencing as these explosions were actually him being triggered out of control, because something would happen that he couldn't control that would trigger his anxiety to such a degree that it would go from an anxiety attack to a full-blown panic attack, and he would literally flip out. But in doing that, he didn't do it around us. He'd go downstairs into the basement and he'd flip out down there away from the rest of us. But when he would come up, he would see the terror in our eyes, and I knew that made him feel so bad. So I realized it wasn't that he was mean, that he was actually being triggered by his anxiety, which he had battled since he was a young man. The other thing that I realized is that, when he would isolate and he'd be gone, sometimes he'd just take a trip. He'd go back on the road because of the kind of work he was in. And he'd be gone for 3 weeks after one of these explosions. And I used to think as a child that he just didn't care about me. He didn't want me around. He was pushing me away. Now I see that it was his way of saying, I'm sorry. He was ashamed because he knew how horribly it affected all of us. And he would go away to give us time to heal and recoup and just kind of put some distance until the dust settled. So it was actually a very merciful and compassionate thing that he was doing. And so for them, from the higher perspective, when I look at all this and I think, well, why did I choose to have a dad? Or why was I born into a family that had a father like this? I realize now that from that perspective, my dad made a contract. He made a contract with all of his kids. And part of that is that he would be a role model for us. And one of the ways that he would be a role model is that he would give us a role model of how to survive and even succeed in the face of high anxiety and depression. Because unbeknownst to all of us, 3 of my brothers would be impacted by depression from a young age and anxiety. And one would end up taking his life, and the other one would end up imploding his family and disappearing for 20 years. Well, he gave us that role model to prepare the one who did become successful as a builder to survive as long as he did, because the odds of him surviving with his type of depression, they say 50% of them die before the age of 50, and he lived to 53, and he was actually successful in life. The other one was successful at a young age, and even though he imploded, he was able to go off and build his own career again. And even after a second implosion, just this past October or November, he's able to get back on his feet, and this time he's actually going to go back and try to reunite with his family. If it wasn't for the role model that my dad gave us on how to survive that kind of situation, I don't think that these two would have done as well as they had. And he also gave me a model of how to keep going in the face of tremendous loss that I couldn't control when depression finally came to call on me in my 50s after my brother took his life. So I believe now that my dad, even though he wasn't perfect, he was perfectly imperfect, because he was just the right dad for me. He was the right dad for my brothers. And I thank God that I know this, because I've been able to share some of this with my brothers and help them see my dad in a different light and heal some of their wounds because of how they had viewed him for so long. So for those of you who grew up with parents with any kind of mental illness like that, I hope this will help you heal some of the wounds that you still carry, so that you can see that your dad, though he wasn't perfect, he was perfectly imperfect. He was imperfectly perfect for you. All right. Have a great week. Happy Father's Day out there. Bye-bye.
Spin me around till I fell asleep. Then up the stairs he would carry me, and I knew for sure